The silence in the great stone arena felt heavier than the mountains that surrounded it. Hundreds of villagers had gathered beneath the towering walls of the citadel, their whispers moving like wind through dry grass. At the center of the arena stood a single figure that eclipsed everything around her. She was enormous, nearly 11 memory tall. Her presence alone turned the crowd into a sea of ants. Her long bronze hair flowed over a dark green cloak that barely reached her knees. And beneath it she wore armor shaped for her colossal form, polished yet worn by years of battle. Her name was Era. Among the giantesses of the High Valley, Era had once been a legend. Warriors spoke of the battles she had won. Children sang songs about how she had lifted entire wagons to rescue trapped villagers. Her strength was unmatched. But today, none of that mattered. Welcome to our channel, Beyond the Observable. Here we explore stories that begin where the obvious ends. Please subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell us where you're listening from. That support helps us bring you stories that are deeper and more unsettling every time. Let's begin. At the top of the stone platform stood the valley's ruler, Lord Varan, a thin man whose authority relied more on fear music than respect. He raised his voice so that every soul in the arena could hear. "Look at her," he said coldly. The crowd fell silent. Varkon slowly walked along the edge of the platform, staring up at Era with a cruel smile. "The mighty protector of our valley," he continued, "the pride of the giant clans." Era's golden eyes remained steady, but her jaw tightened. "And yet," Varkon added, his voice dripping with mockery, "she is useless." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Varan turned to face the people and spread his arms dramatically. "A giantess who cannot bear children, a guardian who cannot give the valley new giants to defend us. Tell me, what value does such a creature truly have?" The words struck harder than any weapon. Ira stood motionless, but her fingers slowly clenched into fists the size of carts. High above the crowd, her chest rose and fell slowly as she fought to maintain control. For giantess, fertility was sacred. Their clans depended on it. Their legacy depended on it, and Varkon knew exactly how deep that wound ran. A woman in the crowd whispered nervously, "He shouldn't say that." But Varkon wasn't finished. He stepped closer to the edge of the platform and pointed up at her towering form. "For years, we fed you, sheltered you, praised you as a protector," he shouted. "And what have you given us in return?" The arena held its breath. Nothing. Era lowered her head slightly. Her hair slid forward like a curtain of bronze silk. For a moment, the crowd thought she might respond, but she said nothing. Music, not a single word. The humiliation hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Near the edge of the arena, chained beside a wagon of supplies, stood a young slave. His name was Kale. Unlike the others, he wasn't looking at Lord Var. He was looking at Era. And what he saw was not weakness, it was pain. The kind of pain someone hides when they have spent their entire life protecting others. Kale had worked near the giantess for months, delivering food and tools to the valley's outer watchtowers where she often stood guard. He had seen how gently she helped villagers repair broken bridges. He had seen her kneel for hours to speak with frightened children. He had even once seen her cry alone beyond the forest cliffs. But none of those people in the arena knew that. To them, she was only a failure. Varkon lifted a scroll. "By decree of the Valley Council," he announced loudly, "Era of the High Giants is hereby stripped of her title as Guardian of the Valley." Music gasps spread through the arena. Ara slowly raised her head. Her voice, when it finally came, was deep music and calm, like distant thunder. "What would you have me do, Lord Varkon?" The ruler smiled thinly. "You will leave the valley by sunset." The words echoed across the stone walls. "You will take nothing with you," Varkon added. "You will return to whatever lonely mountains spawned you." The humiliation was complete. A giantess who had protected the valley for 10 years was now being exiled like a disgrace. Era closed her eyes briefly. Then she nodded. "If that is your will," she said quietly. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some people lowered their gaze, but Varkin only smirked in satisfaction. Guards stepped forward to escort her out. And that was the moment Cale made his decision. The young slave looked down at the iron chain around his wrists. His heart pounded. He knew something no one else in the valley knew. Something that could change everything. Slowly, carefully, he stepped forward. One of the guards turned toward him. "Back in line, slave." But Cale didn't stop. Instead, he lifted his voice, trembling but determined. "My lord," he called out. The entire arena turned. Lord Varkin frowned. "What is it, boy?" Cale swallowed hard. Then he said the words that would shatter the silence of the valley forever. "She isn't sterile." A wave of confusion exploded through the crowd. Varkin's eyes narrowed. "And how?" he said slowly. "Would a slave know something like that?" Cale looked up at the towering giantess who had spent years protecting people who now turned their backs on her. Then he answered, "Because the truth was hidden from her." Ara's golden eyes widened. For the first time since the humiliation began, the giantess looked down at the tiny human standing in chains, and something in her expression changed. Hope, small, fragile, but alive. The arena erupted into whispers. Varkin's voice cut through them like a blade. "Explain yourself." Cale took a breath. "If I speak," he said carefully, "the entire valley will learn why the giantess was never meant to have a child." Ara leaned slightly closer, her massive shadow covering half the music arena. "What do you know?" she asked softly. Cale met her gaze. "Enough," he said quietly. "To destroy the man who humiliated you." The wind moved through the arena like a warning music, because in that moment the slave had just challenged the most powerful man in the valley, and there would be no turning back. The arena no longer whispered. Now it roared. Voices collided. In waves of confusion as hundreds of people turned toward music, the chained slave standing in the dust. Some laughed nervously, others looked at Lord Varkin, waiting for the ruler to crush the boy's claim before it could spread. But Cale did not lower his gaze. Above him, Ara remained frozen like a statue carved from bronze and storm clouds. Her enormous shadows stretched across the arena floor, covering Cale completely. For the first time in years, uncertainty filled her golden eyes. Lord Varkin slowly descended the stone steps of the platform. Each step echoed. The ruler's thin smile had vanished. When he reached the arena floor, he approached Cale slowly like a predator examining something fragile. "You speak dangerous words for someone wearing chains," Varkin said calmly. Two guards grabbed Cale's arms, but the slave did not resist. "I am only speaking the truth," Cale replied. Varkin's eyes flickered toward the towering giantess behind them. Ara had lowered herself slightly, kneeling on one knee so she could hear better. Even kneeling, she towered over the citadel walls. Her voice came like distant thunder. "Let him speak." Varkin didn't turn around. "Your exile has already been declared," he said sharply. Gaze hardened. "I protected this valley for 10 years, she replied quietly. "The least you can allow is the truth." The crowd murmured in agreement. Even some of the guards shifted uncomfortably. Varkin knew it. If he silenced the slave now, suspicion would spread like wildfire. So, he forced a smile. "Very well," he said, turning back toward Cale. "Speak, boy." Cale looked up at Ara again. The giantess's face was no longer calm. It was searching, hope mixed with fear. Cale took a breath. 5 years ago, he said the valley, healer conducted the fertility ritual for the giantess. Ara's fingers tightened against the ground. The memory was clear in her mind. A sacred ceremony, meant to bless the future of giant clans. The healer had declared afterward that her womb was barren. The words had followed her like a shadow ever since. Cale continued, but the healer did not fail the ritual. A ripple moved through the arena. He changed it. The silence returned instantly. Varkin's voice turned cold. You accuse the Valley Healer of treason. Kale shook his head. I accuse him of obedience. Now Varkin's expression shifted only slightly, but Ira noticed. Music. Her massive eyes narrowed. Kale raised his chained hands. The ritual used a fertility stone, he explained. A crystal meant to amplify life energy. Nodded slowly. Music. I remember. But the stone used during your ritual was not a fertility crystal. The arena fell silent again. It was a binding stone. A woman gasped. Elra's breath caught. Binding stones were ancient. Relics used to suppress magical abilities. For giants, that included their ability to create life. Music. The giantess whispered almost to herself that would mean. Kale finished the sentence. You were never sterile. The words exploded across the arena. People began shouting. Others turned toward Lord Varkin. Ira's enormous chest rose sharply. Her golden eyes now burned like fire. Who ordered it? She asked. Her voice was calm, but the ground trembled slightly beneath her knee. Kale looked directly at Lord Var. I believe, he said slowly. The order came from the man who feared what a giant clan could become. The entire crowd turned toward their ruler. Varkin's music jaw tightened. You dare accuse me based on the word of a slave? He snapped. But Kale stepped forward. I was there. That stopped everything. Even Ira froze. You were there? She asked softly. Kale nodded. I worked in the healer's chamber that night cleaning the ritual room. His voice trembled, slightly now, but he forced himself to continue. I saw Lord Varkin deliver the stone. Gasps erupted. Varkin laughed sharply. A convenient lie. Kale shook his head again. He told the healer the same thing he always says. The ruler's smile faded. Kale looked up at the Miatis. He said the valley could never risk giant offspring. Heart pounded. The memory of that night suddenly twisted in her mind. The healer had seemed nervous, afraid. She had assumed it was part of the ritual. But now the truth began forming like lightning in her thoughts. Kale continued quietly. If giant children were born, they would grow. Strong enough to protect the valley without human rulers. The implication hit the crowd like a storm. Varkin stepped forward angrily. This is madness. But Era slowly stood. The movement alone silenced the arena. Her full height cast a shadow across the stone walls. Her voice was no longer soft. Look at me. The ruler hesitated. Then he did. And what he saw made his stomach music tighten. For 10 years, Era had been calm, patient, loyal. But the giantess standing before him now was something else entirely. Not a servant, not a guardian, a force. If what the slave says is true, she said, music slowly, then you stole something sacred from me. The wind swept through the arena. Kale lowered his voice. There is more. Era looked down. What more? Kale swallowed. The binding stone was never meant to last forever. Music widened. The magic fades. The giantess felt something strange in her chest, a warmth she had not felt in years. Kale looked up at her, and according to the healer's notes, he hesitated. Your fertility returned 3 months ago. The entire valley fell silent. Even the wind stopped. Era stood motionless, processing the impossible truth. Then slowly, her enormous gaze turned back music toward Lord Varkin. And this time there was no patience left in it, only quiet rising fury. Is it true? The ruler said nothing, which was answer enough. High above the arena, thunder rolled across the mountains. And for the first time since the giantess had arrived in the valley, the people realized something terrifying. They had never actually seen Ira angry until now. The first sound was not Era's voice. It was the crack of stone. Her fingers had tightened unconsciously against the arena floor, and music, the pressure alone, fractured the massive slab beneath her hand. The sharp echo bounced across the citadel walls. No one moved. Hundreds of villagers stared upward at the towering giantess, whose golden eyes now burned with a quiet storm that had been building for years. Ara slowly straightened to her full height. 11 men of living strength rose above the arena, bronze hair flowing down her back like a banner of fire. The wind caught the edges of her dark green cloak, and for the first time since her arrival in the valley 10 years ago, she no longer looked like their guardian. She looked like judgment. Her voice came low and controlled. "Answer me, Lord Varkin." The ruler tried to maintain his composure, but the tremor in his hands betrayed him. "You are making a mistake," he said quickly. "You are letting a slave manipulate you, but did not blink. Did you order the binding stone?" Varkin glanced at the crowd. Music. The people were watching him now, not her waiting. He tried to laugh again, but the sound was thin. "This is ridiculous." Above him, Ara slowly bent forward, lowering herself, until her enormous face was only a few meters from the arena floor. Even kneeling slightly, she loomed like a living tower, her golden eyes locked onto his answer. The single word carried the weight of thunder. Varkin felt the pressure of hundreds of eyes. He turned sharply toward Kale, seized the slave. 2 guards immediately drew their swords. But before they could take a single step, something enormous moved. Ara's hand descended between them. The impact shook the arena. Her palm, larger than a wagon, rested on the ground like an immovable wall, separating the guards from the boy. Dust drifted through the air. The guards froze. Ara did not even look at them. Her gaze remained fixed on V. No one touches him. The calm certainty in her voice sent chills through the crowd. Varkin's face twisted. "You dare defy the ruler of this valley?" Ira slowly lifted her head. "I protected this valley when the winter storms buried your roads." Her voice grew louder. "I stood against the mountain raiders when your soldiers fled." The ground trembled slightly as she rose higher. "Music, I carried wounded villagers for miles through the snow." Her golden eyes burned, brighter with every word, and all that time she said quietly, "You let me believe I was broken." The accusation hung like lightning in the air. Varkin opened his mouth, but no words came, because deep down he knew. The truth was no longer his to control. Ara turned her head slightly toward the crowd. The movement alone caused gasps. Her massive presence dominated the entire arena. "People of the valley," she said, her voice echoing across the stone walls. Many lowered their heads in shame. "I gave you my strength," she continued. Her gaze softened for a moment. "I gave you my loyalty." Then she looked back at Vargon, "And you repaid it with deception." Kale watched from the ground, his heart racing. For years he had dreamed of this moment. But seeing it unfold was something entirely different. Because Ara was not raging, she was awakening. Varkin finally found his voice again. "You think they will follow you?" he snapped. "You are still a giant." He pointed angrily toward the villagers. "They fear your kind." The crowd shifted nervously. Ara noticed, and slowly something in her expression changed. Not anger, sadness. "I know," she said quietly. For a moment, the arena felt unbearably heavy. Then Ira's enormous hand moved again, but this time it moved toward Kale. Gasps erupted as her massive fingers gently closed around the chains that bound him. The metal links snapped like dry twigs. Kale staggered as the broken chains fell away. Ara carefully lifted him from the ground, raising the small human until he stood safely in her open palm. The crowd held its breath. In her enormous hand, Kale looked impossibly small. Yet the way she held him was careful, protective. Ara studied him for a moment. "You risked your life to tell the truth," she said softly. Kale swallowed. "You deserved to know." For the first time since the humiliation began, a faint warmth appeared in Ara's expression. She lowered her voice so only he could hear. "Why?" Kale hesitated. Then he answered honestly, "Because you were the only one in this valley who ever treated me like a person." Something inside the giantess shifted, a quiet realization. Then Era gently placed Kale on her shoulder, allowing him to steady himself against the fabric of her cloak. The crowd watched in stunned music silence. The giantess slowly turned back toward Lord Varan. Her voice was no longer uncertain. "You exiled me," she said calmly. Varan lifted his chin defiantly. "Yes." Music Era nodded once. "Then I will leave." The ruler blinked in surprise, but the giantess continued, "I will leave your valley." Her gaze swept across the people one last time. "But I will not leave in shame." Thunder rolled again in the distant mountains. "And I will not leave alone." Varkin frowned. "What does that mean?" High above him, eyes flashed with something new. "Hope, power, possibility. It means music," she said quietly. "The future you tried to steal from me is still mine to choose." Kale felt the wind rush around them as the giantess began turning toward the massive gates of the valley. But before she took the first step, a trembling voice rose from the crowd. It was an old woman, the healer. Everyone turned. The elderly woman stepped forward slowly. Her hands shook. "I am the healer's sister." The arena went silent again. Tears filled her eyes as she looked up at Era. "My brother kept a record of everything." She raised a small leather journal, and what the boy said, her voice cracked, is only part of the truth. Era stopped moving. Slowly she looked down. "What else is there?" The old woman took a shaky breath. "My brother discovered something before he died." The wind picked up around the arena. "The binding stone did more than suppress your fertility." Era felt Kale stiffen on her shoulder. "What did it do?" the giantess music asked. The old woman whispered the answer. "It was slowly killing you." The entire arena gasped. Era froze. Kale's eyes widened. But the healer's sister had one more revelation. Her voice trembled. And now that the magic is fading, she looked up at the towering giantess with awe. "Your true power is returning." To a deep rumble rolled through the mountains, and far above the valley, dark clouds began to gather. The first lightning bolt split the sky above the valley. It flashed across the mountains like a blade of white fire, followed by a deep roll of thunder that vibrated through the stone arena. Everyone felt it, but Era felt something more. A strange warmth spread through her chest, deeper than breath, deeper than blood. It was like something ancient inside her had been sleeping for years and was now slowly awakening. Kale tightened his grip on the folds of her cloak as the wind rushed around them. "You feel it too, don't you?" he said quietly. Ira did not answer immediately. Her golden eyes had lifted toward the darkening sky. For a long moment she simply stood there, towering above the valley, bronze hair dancing wildly in the rising storm. Then she spoke. "Yes." Her voice carried across the arena like distant thunder. "I feel it." Below them, the crowd watched in a mixture of fear and awe. Some had never truly understood what a giantess was capable of. They had seen Ara lift carts and move boulders, but that had only been strength. This felt different. The air itself seemed to vibrate around her. The healer's sister clutched the small leather journal tightly. "My brother believed the binding stone was draining your life slowly," she said. "But he also believed something else." Era lowered her gaze. "What?" The old woman swallowed. "He believed your power was never just physical." A murmur rippled through. "For the villagers." Kale leaned slightly forward on Era's shoulder. "Giants are connected to the earth," he said softly. "Everyone knows."